My focus was on what makes people stay in the workplace longer, kind of looking at how engagement and identification can be key in regard to that. And I studied, at first I was going to study millennials, but of course they kind of age out. So I focused on emerging adulthood theory, which is 18 to 29-year-olds.
So good morning and welcome to another episode of Better Business, Better Life. Today I am joined by Dr. Mark Stone, who is over in Phoenix, Arizona. Now, Mark is actually a professional EOS implementer, but he's also got a strong history in organizational development and leadership, which he'll tell you more about. So welcome to the show, Mark.
Thank you for having me. Good to be here.
Absolute pleasure. Hey, we've just been having a quick chat before we came on the podcast, as we always do, hearing a bit about your life story. Would you mind sharing a wee bit of, where you came from and how a Brit ended up in the US?
Yeah, of course. So I was born in Sheffield, northern England. So like a whole bunch of us, not quite make it soccer players, move across to the northeast of America to go kind of coach and still kind of live out trying to still be a player, but having to move into coaching. So I moved to Philadelphia in 2006 and set up a sports coaching business there. And then several years later, moved out here to the sun right the other side of the country. So did a couple of hops. Nice.
And so that's what took you there in the beginning. But obviously life has changed a wee bit since then.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I work as a professional EOS implementer. So I get to live in that special world of helping business leadership teams go and kind of chase down their dreams and go on their journeys together. So, I've been fortunate through my work career in the US to visit about, I think, 35 states. So, yeah, there's been a whole bunch come on from kind of, trudging around the fields of Philadelphia coaching soccer.
Fair enough. So, yeah, obviously we share that same passion, right? That whole, I fell in love with EOS because of the fact that it works on both the business and the lifestyle of business owners, which I think is really important. But what got you into EOS? Like because from what we talked about, you started off in sports instruction, but then moved into some sort of tech companies, e-commerce. How did you come across EOS and why did you decide to pursue that?
So it was handed to me by a CEO who'd just read it and put a whole bunch of it into practice in his firm. So he just set his 10-year target and he was all excited in terms of that realm. And for me, when I read it, I'm quite quantitative. So it kind of hit all the right spots for me. And I felt as a business owner, I'd done several of the things, probably in a much less eloquent way. So it kind of almost had that kind of magic effect of feeling like, hey, these are the things I've been saying and thinking and doing for several years. And somebody managed to kind of put it into a well thought out process. So yeah, that was kind of it. From that point, it kind of reframed my thinking a little bit, and that was the way I think things should ideally be done.
It's interesting because I had the same experience. I've been actually coaching for a number of years as I was running businesses, and I have done my MBA program. And so for me, it actually encompassed all of that learning that was completely impractical with all the practical stuff I've been doing in terms of running businesses and through the coaching that I did. It's like, wow, this is like somebody's actually put this all together in a really simple, pragmatic format that I think gives entrepreneurs a chance to not lose their entrepreneurial spirit, but just have a little bit of structure around it to help them kind of go forward. So you obviously fell in love with the same thing.
Yeah, just the right amount of structure. I think that's
yes.
The key point, right? Absolutely.
I always say we don't want to restrict entrepreneurs because it's them. They really do change the world. And being an entrepreneur myself, I know that I tend to get distracted by bright shiny lights. But if we can just give a little bit of structure, and I say we want them to still zigzag, but just a little bit shorter zigzags rather than kind of going off on complete tangents. So tell me a little bit about you've got a doctorate. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I studied here at Grand Canyon University. It was a 5-year journey. So it kind of becomes a battle of attrition at a certain point, working through the classes and then developing a paper. And kind of like all good kind of stories, mine had a twist in that I did my actual study through COVID. So when you're kind of studying leadership and its effect on turnover, and then unemployment kind of goes through the roof, and everybody's concerned about the job, it kind of made it an interesting study. So my focus was on what makes people stay in the workplace longer, kind of looking at how engagement and identification can be key in regard to that. And I studied, at first I was going to study millennials, but of course they kind of age out. So I focused on emerging adulthood theory, which is 18 to 29-year-olds. So obviously as new generations come through, they face some challenges, and kind of a golden ticket if we can work out how to get those young folks on board, train them up, make them happy, in regard to what they're doing, and keep them for a long while. So yeah, it was a fun time to complete the study.
I can imagine. And in fact, it must be absolutely fascinating because I know that a lot of the business owners I work with struggle, to actually retain staff, and particularly in that younger age group. So what was the key learnings that you took from that study?
So I studied authentic leadership, which is just that, kind of authenticity and self-awareness have kind of become pretty big buzzwords this past, certainly in 2022. But essentially where those younger staff are able to identify that there's a good, clear vision in place, and they've got people around them who will be honest with them, who will encourage them, who will call them out when they're not kind of doing what they're supposed to. That makes people feel part of things and stick around longer. So the kind of key finding was that for leaders, they kind of have to be their self. They have to show an openness, a good moral perspective, be transparent about the decisions. And that's pretty inspiring. So it's not necessarily a secret sauce, but leaders just being themselves and looking to involve their younger people in some of their thinking sometimes.
I can see how that dovetails perfectly with EOS then, right? Because we're all about actually having those open, honest conversations, fighting for the greater good, and working together as a leadership team as opposed to in distinct silos. So I can imagine that would have appealed, the EOS framework would have appealed in terms of that.
Yeah, and then obviously the Jim Collins that we speak to, the right people, right seat, where you can set people up in that regard, that can be, absolutely key as well to allow people to go perform. I seem to speak to a lot of leaders in this past 6 months who, heavily focused on work-life balance, which of course we do our very best is to, help folks get as kind of as strong as possible. But then also I hear a lot of leaders kind of apologizing for the leader that they're not. And I try and encourage everybody to be self-aware about the things that, might be blind spots for us, but really be more about our strengths and focus on those than worrying about our weaknesses. Kind of after 23, 24, we kind of who are we going to be anyway for the rest of our lives. So it makes sense to kind of make the most of that rather than worry about the stuff we're not.
Excellent. So I know that you graduated from EOS Bootcamp earlier on this year, and you've got quite a number of clients that you're working with. What have been some of the real key aha moments for you in some of those businesses? Because, I know they're all very, very different, but there's often, similar things that we see happening in those businesses.
Yeah, I think every business is unique and has its own variables and goals and challenges. But yeah, I think several of those kind of challenges are on quite similar themes. I think it's pretty fantastic what we do, that we get to partner with folks to work on some of those things. And I think my key learning has been that the knowledge is nearly always in the room. It's up to us to help groups to kind of dissect it, pull it out, and then kind of jump on it. So I think that's maybe the most fun part of what we get to do on a daily basis.
I agree with you. I think that a lot of people think that, we're business coaches or consultants who are there to kind of tell them what to do. But I always joke that I'm just the dumb blonde with the marker at the front of the room. Because as you said, the knowledge is in the room. It's our job to just get that knowledge out, ask the hopefully intelligent questions, and get them thinking about what is the right answers.
Yeah, without question. That's a fun thing to be a part of. And particularly as we help people develop those vision traction documents out, to then to be able to see the kind of energy in the room when those things are kind of crystallized and perhaps even clarified for the first time is pretty key. I chatted with a business owner yesterday who kind of mentioned he has a whole bunch of that kind of mapped out, but he's not shared it with any of his people yet. And I'm like, that's really kind of the secret sauce. Go talk about it, go share it regularly, and work out who really wants to be on board with you.
Yeah. Actually, it's really interesting. When we do the second day of EOS, so we're actually getting into that, what's our core values? What's our 10-year target? What is our core focus? We know that this vision already exists, right? It already exists in the brains, usually of the founders and often the whole leadership team. And often the founders, when they share it and they get the team's input, they realize that they've all been on the same page, but they haven't been able to clearly articulate it and, have the same message that they can then share with the broader team. So I always love it when you have that light bulb moment, like, that's it, we've nailed it. That's what it's all about.
And going back to my study a little bit, that's kind of key, because that gets people engaged and focused and driven. I think when folks truly feel part of something where it's not as much of a mandate, then it really gets kind of buy-in, and it's just more fun as well, right? You get to kind of really enjoy each kind of step in the journey.
Yeah, absolutely. Have you ever had a team where there hasn't been quite so much cohesiveness when you're doing that longer term planning?
Um, yeah, I think I did. I've worked in some other realms where we do behavioral assessment. So I think when you see people come in with different viewpoints, I think sometimes I found that people can ultimately believe and see the same thing, but describe it differently, or come at kind of come at it from a different angle. So I think that's pretty common. I think something that's really kind of enjoyable on our part is kind of supporting people in developing a synthesized view. So I've had a few teams where they're not necessarily not cohesive, but have different kind of viewpoints, and allowing them to kind of share those and get on the same page and work out which things to focus on has been pretty fun. But yeah, it's just interesting. We're all different in terms of our kind of natural levels of extroversion and our competitiveness, the levels of patience we have. So it's interesting when you mesh all those in the room, and a successful business needs different viewpoints and different characteristics and different drives. So yeah, it's fun to do that. I've done some work previously in working with folks where we identify some of those things. So again, it goes back to trying to help people focus on what they are and what they're not, and no, that's okay. Like, don't try and change to kind of suit the room. Be yourself.
Yeah, and that comes back to that right people in the right seats as too, doesn't it? Where you actually want a range of different people with different skills, but all on the same page in terms of the core values that they believe in. What's how we work around here.
To get to that same page can sometimes be quick and sometimes be a little longer, and that's okay. That's okay too.
Yeah. Perfect. Hey, one of the things that I always really loved about EOS, and it was one of the things that kind of sold me, was that in terms of the proven process, we don't jump into that vision, core value stuff in the first day. Our first day is very much about teaching practical tools they can take out and use. And having worked for many, many years at the Ice House and other various incubators, we always did this big session of, woohoo, let's develop our vision and our mission and all these things. And we have a great day. And then we walk out of the workshop space, go out into the real world. And of course, nothing had changed, which means we're back to fighting fires. We're back to doing all the same stuff we always did. And I always wondered, how come the people didn't embrace this and just run with it. And I think what I learned through EOS is that actually you've got to change fundamentally the way the business works, first of all, before you can introduce that stuff in an effective way, which is what our first day does. So, tell me a little bit about that, the process for you and what you love about it.
I have a mentor who's quite familiar with our process, and we've discussed that several times. He kind of asked me, hey, how come you don't do the vision related stuff, the core values and the core focus on the first day? But yeah, I think obviously there's a lot of benefit to what we do in making sure that whoever's going to put their hand up and take responsibility has a say when those bigger picture and longer term targets are set in place. So yeah, I think it's really key to make sure you have the right people contributing into that early defining period, and ultimately taking responsibility for going and working on it kind of day one after they leave our session.
Yeah. So you're talking about the fact that we deal with structure first. We look at the accountability chart and go, right, what's the right structure that we need to actually deliver on the long-term vision? And then we sort of give them some tools to actually start putting in place. So when they come back on the second day, they can then start to look at that longer-term picture.
Yeah. And it's so often that we... Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. No, go on.
I said, and I think it's so often the case that where that accountability chart isn't quite set, and there are right people, right seat issues, that there are so many issues that derive from that. So I think it's really a key, it's obviously a key tool that we use to help people get set up. But there's so many times I think when there is an issue in a business that people element is the thing to go fix and work on, and really put a whole bunch of effort into getting straight as quickly as possible.
Yeah, completely agree. So I have a favorite tool in the EOS, but I'm not going to share that yet. What do you have a favorite tool that you sort of just feel really changes things sort of fundamentally for businesses?
Well, I kind of want to hear what yours is first. Am I allowed to? It's kind of like
no. I'm going to hold on to it. I want to hear what yours is, and I'm happy to share.
I think mine is our level 10 meetings and the issue solving track. I'm by nature a fast moving, proactive individual, so that kind of mechanism for getting issues out on the table, digging into the root causes to make sure we're having real, purposeful, authentic conversations, and then having a way to go get to make decisions and set actionable to-dos that we're accountable for. I love that mechanism for bringing people together, and it's also dedicated strategic time. It allows those folks who are working on their work-life balance to know this is a daily issue that I really should go chat with somebody about today, and this is a issue to save for our strategic meeting. So I think it's those level 10 meetings that really bring everything together and allow those leadership teams to, get and stay on the same page. So how about you?
We're on the same page. It's also my favorite tool. And what I love about the IDS particularly is I think that as humans, we've got this natural tendency to want to jump in and kind of solve things immediately without spending the time to work out what's really behind the issue. And so I love the fact that IDS kind of forces you to spend a lot of time identifying what that real issue is and then discussing all the possible options, not just going, yep, I've got the solution. Let's fix that. And before you actually get to the practical, okay, what are the next steps? What are the to-dos? So yeah, I do believe that just even just using IDS without a level 10 meeting can fundamentally change the way you approach business and life.
Yeah, and I think going back to how people have different viewpoints, that moment when we've discussed an issue where, somebody calls out, are we ready to make a decision here? I found that, in observing those and working with my teams to get feedback that, about half of the time the issue is everything that's said needs to be said. And then the other half of the time somebody's had a new thought or they've been kind of sat on something that they want to contribute and move towards. So I think it's kind of a field that leadership teams develop to make sure that before they do make a decision, everybody's been heard, had some input, and it's a good, full, high quality decision rather than just a tick box to move on to something else.
Surface level. Yeah. Now, it's really interesting. I was working with a client a little while ago, and I mean, we talk about the fact that, hey, you've got accountability. So if you can solve things in your own area, go ahead and do that. But if you need the help of the team, bring it up to the leadership team. And this was a company that was having a few cash flow issues, a few challenges in that sort of, cash flow area. And they were a food manufacturer. So they had a head chef who was kind of in charge of the recipes and producing the meals. And they had so he was there in terms of the operational side of things. We had all the usual sales and marketing, the integrated, the visionary, and the finance and admin person. And of course, people would normally think, cash flow has to be resolved by the finance team. But it was actually the chef in the end who came up with the solution, because he was the one working in the space day in, day out. And once he understood what the issue really was, he could have put his mind to it and they discussed it. And of course, the team owned the decision, but he was the one that actually brought something a bit new to the table that they couldn't see for looking in some respects.
Yeah. I've taught at the business school nearby, and I teach marketing and leadership, which are my passions. But I often try and kind of project on the students. I'm like, the classes you really need to be listening to are the ones in finance and accounting, if they're not your first love, because they're being able to see somebody else's viewpoint, I think, is key to being a good leadership team member. So yeah, I think it goes back to those different viewpoints and trying to get a balanced level of input from each expert, right?
Yeah, yeah. So if we've got some people who are sitting here thinking, what the heck is EOS? I mean, I would hope that they've heard a little bit about it on the podcast, but I mean, how would you describe what EOS is and what it does for a business?
So to me, I go back to it's a business operating system to harness human energy. And then the other way I would always, like to explain it is it's a set of, simple tools that are rolled out in a, very kind of careful manner to help groups achieve those, three focus areas of ours of helping them with their vision, traction, and health. So I think sometimes, what a business operating system, requires some explanation, but I tend to just lean on it's a whole bunch of simple tools that we use in a very careful order to get you all on the same page and moving together with that accountability.
Yep. Yeah, that's cool. I think it's true. I mean, often when I say, I'm an EOS implementer, they go, entrepreneur operating system, is it a piece of software? It's like, well, no, it's not a piece of software. There is some software that can certainly help you, but really it is, putting some structure around all those key areas in the business and making sure that, as you said, implementing simple, I call them pragmatic tools that you can put in place in a certain order that helps to bring everybody onto the same page and have that discipline and accountability. And get comfortable with being uncomfortable. I think that's one of my favorite, of our healthy rules. I always talk about the elephant in the room. It's one of my sort of specialties, is like uncovering that elephant and helping them resolve it. But I think that a lot of teams just have never had that opportunity to be really open, be really honest, and have those frank discussions about things that are pretty major in the business.
Yeah, I think we give folks a forum and almost permission to go and, almost an encouragement and maybe even a slight pressure to go dig in and, be that open and honest. And really
Yeah.
share your feelings. And I think it puts the onus on folks. And I think that's a great thing in the long term, because again, it gets that engagement and gets people part of something. So yeah, I would entirely agree.
Yeah. Yeah, I was working with a team that, they started doing EOS, and it's always a little bit difficult in the beginning. I always feel a little bit sorry for them because we kind of challenge everything that they know, and we really put them on the spot in terms of changing some things. But after 9 months, they'd actually hit their 12-month target. And the team that had come in the beginning to the team that was actually there at 9 months was slightly different because we'd gone through the accountability chart. There'd been some changes in that leadership team. And from not really knowing, why they existed, what they were there for, what was really going on, even after 9 months, it was such a fundamental change in that team and how they worked together. And they had the fights, but they did it for the greater good, which meant that, they were getting the right results. And it's just great to see them actually having those open, frank discussions. It makes my heart sing, seeing that kind of stuff happen.
Yeah, and I think that even that word that you mentioned, that change word, for a whole
Yeah.
bunch of folks in the world, that's exciting, and for the other half, that's something that kind of makes them kind of shudder a little bit. So I think being
Yeah.
able to support groups through those changes is, yeah, I think that's a really fun part of what we get to do.
So what's been the biggest kind of challenge that you've had yourself, either in your own businesses or in working with people through EOS? What do you think is the biggest thing that's been a hurdle?
If I go back to my own challenges, one of the first jobs I had was for a company that went bankrupt.
Oh,
So a couple of years later, when I decided to set my own business up, I did it without particularly any capital. The bank manager that wouldn't lend us £600 to go set up a business, I kind of routinely went in to give him a hard time and let him know, hey, we're still here, we're still functioning. But I think there was probably a method in
nice.
his madness. But in setting up, kind of learning those lessons of seeing how a company overspent and didn't have great systems in place, I built my first two businesses with contractors, and I also kind of had the priority that we were going to pay people that we owed straight away. So as soon as somebody's wage was due, we were going to pay that, and that was a priority. So in trying to build,
Yep.
fast growing, aggressive businesses without a whole bunch of capital, that was probably the biggest challenge.
I'm interested because, that definitely having contractors makes it a bit easier in the beginning, but how do you actually motivate, inspire and keep contractors on the same page? Because, people will often say, oh, well, contractors, they don't actually work for you. They've got every opportunity to kind of leave. How did you keep them, motivated and inspired on the same page?
Well, I think that was a great learning opportunity for me, because in my 20s, where you're naturally extra bold and ready to move on things, I really needed those contractors much more than they needed me. So I think it meant that the folks that
Ah,
we brought in, we really did have to become about that kind of exciting vision and be clear with people on how they could come in, do well and be part of it. I think it made that the
yep.
central focus out of a desperation. So as you know, when you get those people that are excited about what you're doing on board, typically good things fall into place. So in the two
Yep.
businesses I set up, one stayed almost entirely on a contractor model, with the exception of some full-time staff. The other business, the one back in Britain, transitioned to have full-time salaried staff. But I still think even in that entity, we were able to keep the same kind of commitment and focus. So it really does connect in with one of the key pillars of EOS, of getting the right people on board to make life easy.
Yeah, people who kind of share your why and share your core values. It's interesting. One of my clients is actually a VA, virtual assistant service, and she's got 40 odd contractors around New Zealand, and they are all contractors, and yet they still run EOS. They still have their level 10 meetings, and the team, they're just another team. It doesn't matter what their status of employment is. They're still on the bus with them, living and breathing the vision and all in it for the greater good.
Yeah, and I think since obviously the pandemic, there's become a new pressure on organizations to really go out and foster that environment, to be able to keep and retain and kind of maximize the talent that they've got. And I think in many ways that's a good thing. It's really put
Yeah.
pressure on organizations to go and be appealing to people. So I think it's an opportunity, and those that kind of do best of that are going to have the best talent and win in the long term.
Yeah. But the reality is sometimes we have the wrong person, right? And we actually don't want to keep them because they're not doing
Yeah, of
great
course,
things for
we
the
see that a lot.
company. So, have you had, what experiences have you had with that, and how have you dealt with it, or how have you seen others deal with it?
Yeah, I've dealt with that several times, and I think it's in working with folks who are handling that, because it is difficult. Again, transition and change is always tricky, but I think it's also the best move for an individual many times. If somebody's not capable of excelling in that role, or they don't jive with the company's culture, it really does help that person to cut to the chase as quickly as possible. And as we know, if somebody sits in a role that's not right for them for 6 months, and then
Yeah.
they leave, then they have to go find another role, and then they've got a short-term job position on their resume. And I think it's really better both for the business and for the person themselves, where there's good, open, honest, frank conversations and opportunities to change or progress or adapt or perhaps find another seat. But yeah, I think that boldness and openness and honesty can be pretty pivotal for everybody.
And I always sort of think that, just because somebody isn't right for your organization doesn't mean they're not going to be really happy somewhere else. Because let's face it, there are many, many different organizations, many, many different cultures, different ways of working. And I think sometimes, obviously, yes, you want to do everything in your power to help a person become the best they can be and fit in with where you are. But if it's not working, you're best to let them go, because they will be happier finding somewhere else where they fit in better. But also from a company perspective, it just changes the dynamics in the company as well, right?
Yeah, and going back to those younger staff, they're supposed to be going through a whole period of exploration. When you look at the population in the US, how younger people are staying younger longer. They're getting married later, they're having children later, they're buying houses later.
Yeah.
So in theory, that 20s is a great time to explore, and the chances and probability of finding a great company in a great industry, the first one or two jobs, are naturally quite high. So yeah, I think where folks can have good conversations about that's key. And of course, that goes back to those core values being defined, and banging the drum on what they are and why they are the way they are as regularly as possible.
Yeah, and hiring, firing, rewarding, and recognizing with those core values. Cool. Now, I know that you have a family. You've got a couple of daughters, and I assume a wife over there. So do you use EOS in your family life?
Yeah, we have a scorecard on our fridge. So I have a 7 and a 10-year-old girl. So
Yes.
Emma and Olivia, and and my wife Jamie, their mum, she's a teacher. So they're all trundling off to school early and getting home late each day and working hard on the homework. So we use the scorecard in our house to try and get the right balance between the schoolwork and kind of a healthy body and mind. So yeah,
That is awesome.
Small story. The other day, the Asa, our elf on the shelf, actually happened to be reading one of the traction books one morning, which I thought was either miraculous and magic or quite witty on the part of my other half.
That is awesome. I love it. So do you have things on the scorecard too? You and your wife?
Yeah, I'm pretty diligent on my scorecard. Again, being excuse me one second. Just being very quantitative. I like that weekly accountability. So yep, I have two scorecards for my practice and one for personal things. And I think it's good to keep going and be looking at what's important. And yeah, those weekly kind of check-ins for all different areas are so beneficial.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. It's funny because my husband's been saying recently, whenever he has something kind of challenge, shall we IDS that? And he hasn't really actually quite embraced EOS yet, but he's starting to pick up some of the terminology, which is good. They talked about a scorecard.
Our families live it with us, right? They get to be part of it.
Yeah, it is great. Okay, so we've heard a little bit about, sort of your story and what you're doing. I'd love to hear from you because we like to give the listeners a couple of, tips or tools they can use in their personal and professional life. Do you have a couple of tips, 3 tips or tools you could share with us?
Yeah, so sure. So I think the key one that's always stood me in good stead is having that clear picture. And I think when you're working on a vision with folks, it's important to have that both at a group level, whatever group it is, whether it's a sports club, a charity, or a business. I think it's important to have the big overarching vision, and then also spend the time working with that individual to make sure that you're aware of their vision and you're able to have some kind of commitment and part in that. So I think setting visions at different levels is really important, and making sure that it's exciting, appealing, and that you're on the same page. I think that'd be my first one. I think the second one, to kind of repeat it again, after our mid-20s, it really just makes sense to concentrate more on our strengths than our blind spots. So be aware of those blind spots, but really just be kind of who you are and really hammer home on on those strengths. And I think part of our job is we very often get to let people know, and clarify what their strengths are. So if somebody's unsure, go ask the 4 or 5 people in and around you. What do you think my strengths are, and you'll get some great insight. And then I think the other one, in terms of accountability, it really comes down to the people that you kind of have around you. Those that you have your conversations with, or that you kind of share discussion on some of those blind spots, and those that help hold you accountable to those big audacious goals. So yep, I think those would be my 3: the vision, the knowing your strengths and acting on them, and then having great people around to help keep you accountable, and I think also inspire you as well. That's key as well.
Yeah, I always say that, I enjoy exercise, but I'm not very good at going to the gym on my own. And so I have to have somebody who actually holds me accountable. I've got a personal trainer 3 times a week. I have to go in there, do my weight training. Otherwise, I would find every excuse under the sun not to do it. So I think, that accounts. Having people around you who can actually hold you accountable is really important for me. That's for sure.
Yeah. And I think there are certain things that we naturally kind of hold ourselves accountable to. And then there are some areas where we need that help. So I think, I like that idea as well. Good on you.
Thank you. Yeah, the business I've got no problem with whatsoever, but not so much on the health thing. Okay, so Mark, you work with companies, you actually help them to implement EOS. You're there to kind of, teach them the tools, facilitate discussions, and hold them accountable. What kind of clients do you like to work with, and where are they located?
My executive coach actually asked me this question the other day, and I kind of gave a kind of a feeble, non-specific answer. But when I thought about it, it comes down to me for any leadership team that are on they're looking to head in a certain direction, and they're open, honest, growth oriented, and ready to go take those next steps. I'm always happy to have conversations with those, and it's kind of fun, right? You feel that excitement when you have a great conversation with other leaders. So I think they're my criteria. Yeah. For me, I try and bring that positivity to things, and I'm naturally quite purposeful. So I think the clients that are suited to me are the ones that want to benefit from somebody who can help them in working out what are 3, 4, 5 steps ahead, and then what things do we need to take care of to kind of get there.
Perfect. And is there a particular location? Because I know that you're obviously in Phoenix, Arizona. What are the areas that you tend to work in, or is?
Yeah. So typically out here in the Southwest. So happy to travel anywhere in this region. So Arizona, California, New Mexico, Texas, and such. Again, depending on the team and the opportunity. Being a Brit, I've been able to hit 30 odd states in the US. So I'm always kind of open to traveling somewhere new and exciting. I have a couple that are on my list to try and get to in the next couple of years, but primarily in the Southwest here.
Fair enough. But you also can do things virtually as well, right? And we've all adapted to doing virtual, particularly when you've got teams that are based around the world.
And I have a company at the moment, a wonderful group of leaders who specialize in virtual events. So they're kind of, perfectly suited to managing that environment. And I just had a new client I partnered with this week, who we're going to have, I think, folks in three different countries for our calls. So that'll provide a unique challenge, and we'll be checking our world clocks to make sure we all start at the right time. But yeah, I think virtual has just become part of it at this point, right?
Absolutely. So if people want to get hold of you, Mark, where would they actually find you?
Yep. So LinkedIn's always a good spot. So just searching for Mark Stone Phoenix EOS on LinkedIn will do it, or by email at mark.stone@eosworldwide.com.
Oh, that's fantastic. Hey, look, Mark, thank you so much for spending time with us this morning. Really appreciate having a chat with you about your experiences. Look forward to keeping in contact and hopefully seeing you again soon.
Well, thank you so much. I enjoyed the chat.